Part 2. Descartes, Dreams and Demons. We have been looking, with the help of some cinematic portrayals, at ways in which Plato's cave image can be used to think about aspects of our social and political existence. We will touch once more on these broader issues of knowledge and society towards the end of the chapter. For now, let us return to matters more directly related to the issue of knowledge. Plato, as we have seen, uses the cave image to illustrate his account of knowledge. In it, he throws into question the faith we ordinarily place in our senses. All that our senses reveal to us, he thinks, are mere shadows and illusions, removed from reality. But why should we question our faith in the senses? Here it would be helpful to look at a thought of a more recent philosopher, the French philosopher Rene Descartes. Some 2,000 years after Plato, in the 17th century, Descartes published his Meditations on First Philosophy. Here, he raises issues very similar to those raised by Plato. Like Plato, he wants us to question our ordinary reliance on sense experience for our knowledge of the world and to challenge our complacency, our confidence that what we take to be knowledge really is knowledge. In order to do so, Descartes presents a number of skeptical arguments which are designed to show that a great deal of what we think we know on the basis of our experience can in fact be called into question, even what seems most obvious. He employs two arguments in particular here, the dream argument and the evil demon argument. Descartes begins by pointing out that we sometimes go wrong in our judgments about small or distant objects. For example, thinking that a distant tower is square when in fact it is round. This is the first kind of skeptical consideration he raises, but as he himself recognizes, this is not enough to radically call into question what our experience tells us about the world. In such cases, we can always correct our mistake in the light of further experience, for example, by approaching the tower and inspecting it more closely. So it would seem at first glance that we are perfectly capable of distinguishing between the illusory and the real in our ordinary experience. But, like Plato, Descartes wants to raise the possibility that our sense experience might radically mislead us about the world. He proceeds to raise a more radical doubt about what experience tells us, to suggest that he might go wrong even about things which are right before us, for example, that he is sitting by the fire in his dressing gown, holding a piece of paper in his hand. This Descartes does through his famous dream argument. He points out that we do dream, and that although dreams are sometimes dreamlike, disordered, and full of strange associations, they can also be very lucid. He can thus raise the question, how does he know that he is sitting by the fire, writing, and not in fact asleep, in bed, merely lucidly dreaming that he is sitting by the fire, writing? And indeed, as Descartes puts it, quote, "As I think about this more carefully, I see plainly that there are never any sure signs by means of which being awake can be distinguished from being asleep," end quote. The difficulty in answering this question throws into question those beliefs that seem to be based on the evidence of one's immediate experience. We have seen that Plato's cave provides a handy model for thinking about the cinema, and so too do dreams. It has often been suggested that viewing a film has similarities with dreaming. Speaking of Hollywood as the dream factory and of theaters as dream palaces is not merely to employ a picturesque metaphor. In the cinema as well, we are in a darkened room, our physical activity has been limited, and our visual perception is heightened to compensate for our lack of movement. And it has been argued by some that it is precisely because the film viewer's situation is like the dreamer's that, like the dreamer, we accept what we see as real. And, quote, flimsy two-dimensional images have the uncanny substance of real bodies and things, end quote. A good deal of film theory based on Freudian psychoanalysis takes its start from the similarity between dreamer and film viewer. However, when we come to consider the issue that Descartes poses of whether it is possible to determine whether we are dreaming or not, it is the differences between films and dreams that come to the fore. As we have already seen in connection with Plato's cave, if the cinematic image is an illusion, it is an illusion that we voluntarily subject ourselves to, and in full awareness of its status as an illusion. So we can easily distinguish between the cinematic dream and reality. With his dream argument, Descartes is suggesting the possibility of a much more radical kind of deception, arising because of the difficulty in determining whether what we see is a dream or reality. We can, however, find situations that come closer to the possibility envisioned in the dream argument being portrayed within films. The dream argument's scenario of possible deception and the question it poses regarding what we think we know appears in an updated form in Total Recall. In one scene, a doctor who has turned up at the hotel room tries to convince the hero, Doug Quaid, Arnold Schwarzenegger, that he is not, in fact, an invincible secret agent fighting the villains on Mars. Rather, he is a lowly construction worker strapped into a chair on Earth in the offices of a company called Recall, and he is merely dreaming that he is an invincible secret agent fighting the villains on Mars. It is all part of a futuristic holiday in which one buys memories of one's trips rather than actually going on the journey. Indeed, we saw Quaid paying for this earlier and getting into the chair to be prepared for his holiday. However, the doctor continues, things have gone wrong. They cannot wake Quaid. He is experiencing a free-form delusion based on our memory tapes, and the doctor himself is a mere representation sent into Quaid's dream to help him return to reality. All that Quaid has to do is to swallow a little red pill as a symbol of his desire to return to reality. Inside his dream, he will fall asleep, presumably to awake in the real world. If he doesn't take the pill, he will remain trapped in his delusion and back on Earth. He will be lobotomized. Quaid, of course, has to work out whether the doctor is telling the truth or is in fact in league with the evil forces that Quaid is fighting, and his whole story is really a fabrication designed to trap him. As it happens, he is able to do so. As he is about to swallow the pill, he notices a trickle of sweat running down the doctor's brow, a sign of nervousness that convinces him the doctor is lying. This might seem like a reasonable enough kind of response to the dream argument. You find some tests to determine whether or not you are dreaming, such as some element in your present experience that is inconsistent with your being in a dream. But one of the intriguing things about the dream argument is that it has a way of resisting such easy responses. The problem is that any test we might come up with for determining whether we are dreaming or not, such as pinching ourselves or seeing if our eyes are open, might itself be part of our dream. In Quaid's case, the trickle of sweat on the doctor's brow, which seems to imply that the doctor is lying and that he, Quaid, is not dreaming, could itself be part of an extended dream. Indeed, all the action that Quaid finds himself involved in after getting into the chair at Recall, everything we've been watching since that point, could conceivably be part of one long dream. It is a possibility that is, in fact, rather teasingly suggested in the film itself. After all, as the doctor suggests, Quaid's adventures as a secret agent are indeed just as he requested for his virtual holiday, right down to the physical appearance of the woman he meets there. Perhaps the doctor is telling the truth after all. Even Quaid starts to wonder about things by the end. In the final scene, Quaid, having defeated the forces of evil and saved the planet, turns to his female sidekick, Melina, and says, "I've just had a terrible thought. What if this is all a dream?" "Well then, kiss me quick before you wake up," she replies. This possibility is taken even more seriously in Existenz by David Cronenberg, 1999, where the relevant illusion-creating device is a futuristic form of video game called Existenz that plugs directly into the spine and allows one to inhabit a complete virtual reality. Towards the end, the central characters, Allegra Geller and Ted, seem to unplug themselves and escape from the game, only to realize that for all they know, they may still be in it. In the final scene, it looks as if they have at last truly escaped. It appears that the game they have been playing, indeed everything that has happened so far in the film, has itself been part of the game. Transcendence that they have been trialing. But just when they seem to have finally definitively returned to reality, someone is still able to ask, "Hey, tell me the truth. Are we still in the game?" The film ends at this point with the issue unresolved. It thus takes seriously the idea that nothing in our experience seems to be able to completely exclude the possibility that everything we currently experience might be an illusion. Anything we care to propose as a test for being in the real world could itself be part of an illusory one, a virtual reality, or a dream. For this reason, we have to question the advice given in Waking Life, Richard Linklater from 2001, in which one character confidently suggests that you can tell you are awake rather than having a lucid dream if you can make out small numbers or change the light level in a room. You can't do these things, he insists, if you are dreaming. This is a useful tip for the central character, who spends the entire film trying to wake up from a series of dreams in which he encounters people discussing, amongst other things, various aspects of dreams and dreaming. That is, it at least allows him to determine, at a couple of points, that despite his best efforts, he is still asleep. But we have to ask, even if he has been able to pass the test, could he ever really have been sure that he was awake? Once again, it is not clear why any test we might care to propose, including being able to read small numbers or change light levels, could not be compatible with our being in the midst of a dream. Descartes' dream argument thus raises the possibility that what we presently experience might be a dream, and that what we think is real might not be real at all. However, this is only the second stage in Descartes' series of skeptical arguments. For Descartes, there are still some beliefs about the world that we can maintain despite the dream argument. Dreams, he argues, derive their content from waking experience. We dream of things like people, houses, trees, and so on. And so, even if we do not know at any particular moment whether what we are experiencing is real or part of a dream, what we experience can still give us a general idea of what the world is like. So Descartes introduces a third skeptical argument, one that seems to throw into doubt all beliefs based on experience. He raises the possibility that some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning has employed all his energies in order to deceive me. Such a being could cause us to go wrong even in that which we consider absolutely certain. Everything we experience might be an illusion, generated in us by the evil demon. As such, we cannot be sure what the world is like, or even whether there is a world outside us at all. We cannot even be sure of basic mathematical truths, such as 2 + 2 = 4. A more recent version of this evil demon argument is the brain in a vat scenario. How do we know we are not, in fact, brains floating in a vat hooked up with various electrodes, with an evil scientist using a computer to feed electronic impulses into us, giving us all the experiences we now have and making us think that everything is normal? The idea of systematic deception by an all-powerful, malevolent being thus raises the possibility that we could be so profoundly manipulated that everything we have ever taken to be reality could be illusory. With the evil demon, Descartes formulates another haunting philosophical image to rank with that of Plato's cave. We can gain a sense of just how radical this kind of deception is because many cinematic portrayals of systematic deception fall considerably short. One film that seeks to portray a situation of deliberate systematic deception is Peter Weir's The Truman Show, 1998. At the outset of the film, at least, the central character, Truman, Jim Carrey, is blissfully unaware that the town he has grown up in is in fact a studio set, and that his neighbors are all actors, and that he is the unwitting main character of a show being beamed out live to a huge TV audience. The whole setup is being controlled behind the scenes by the show's all-powerful director, Christoph Ed Harris, from a suitably unworldly control room high above the set behind an artificial moon. Despite all this, however, the deception here is far less radical than that portrayed in the evil demon situation. Even when he is thoroughly deceived about the nature of his situation, Truman remains at all times in contact with the real world, even if the reality is only that of a television studio set. To that extent, it is quite right for the actor who plays Truman's best friend to say, "It's all true. It's all real. Nothing here is fake. Nothing you see on this show is fake. It's merely controlled." This may be a false, inauthentic world, but not in the sense of being a perceptual illusion. The situation is similar in The Game, David Fincher, 1997. Here, Michael Douglas plays the corporate executive, Nicholas Van Orton, who has been enrolled by his brother in a mysterious live-action game for his birthday. He has no idea of the rules or the aim of the game, but he finds himself caught up in a series of increasingly bizarre episodes. Eventually, it becomes impossible for him to tell whether what is happening in his life is really as it seems or simply part of the game. Yet here also, the deception is not truly radical. The game itself is taking place in Orton's everyday reality, which he never leaves. Even in Dark City, where aliens secretly manipulate not only a cityscape, but also the memories of its inhabitants as part of a large-scale experiment to see how humans tick, the events in the film still take place within the reality of the characters. a film that comes significantly closer to the evil demon situation with regard to the depth of the deception that it presents is The Matrix. The premise of this film is that most of humanity has been enslaved by a race of intelligent machines that use human bodies as power sources. They are, however, completely unaware of their real situation. Everything seems normal because a supercomputer feeds them a simulated reality, the Matrix. Only a few rebels have managed to escape this enslavement and are able to offer resistance to the machines. Thus, at the outset of the film, before he escapes from the Matrix, everything that the central character Neo experiences and takes to be real is in fact a computer-generated illusion. This is the same kind of updating of the evil demon scenario that we find in the brain in the vat scenario. Indeed, as in that scenario, most of humanity in the film is in reality floating in tanks, hooked up with electrodes through which they are fed their simulated reality. The Matrix is particularly interesting because it also incorporates some of the other themes that we have been looking at. As a metaphor for the illusory world of the Matrix, there are multiple references to dreams and to the possibility which Descartes raised in the dream argument that we might be dreaming without knowing it. The leader of the rebels, Morpheus, has the name of the Roman god of dreams and sleep, and when he goes into the Matrix to enlist Neo to the resistance cause, he offers our hero the opportunity to awaken from his illusion. The conundrum that Morpheus poses here is pure Descartes. Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world? Moreover, because the Matrix is a collective illusion, with many people sharing the same illusory reality and being systematically deceived from birth onwards, it is a situation that also resembles Plato's cave. The film recalls other themes associated with the cave as well. When the traitor amongst the rebels, Cypher, betrays his comrades because he yearns to escape from harsh reality to return to the unreal comforts of the Matrix, he is like those amongst Plato's prisoners who are bewildered when their illusions are disturbed and who are happier left in their original state. He is willing to sacrifice truth for a happiness based on illusion. The cave story's linking of illusion and a wider social imprisonment is also touched on, since the Matrix is a tool of social control. In the film, Morpheus and Neo talk at several points about the Matrix's program's role of keeping human beings in stupefied captivity. Overall, the film refers us to a number of the philosophical themes we have been considering. At this point, however, the theme I want to emphasize is Descartes' evil demon argument, which the film illustrates well because it invokes both a malevolent, all-powerful agency working behind the scenes, fabricating every aspect of people's experience, and the possibility that we might be completely, systematically deceived by this agency. The evil demon argument could easily be restated in terms drawn from the Matrix. Might it not be the case that everything we experience, everything we have ever experienced, even what we take to be basic logical truths, could be a fabrication generated by some supercomputer? How could we tell the difference between such a fabricated world and the real world? And the effect of such a question is similarly to throw into doubt in a very radical way what our experience tells us about the world. Where the Matrix is less than radical is in the ease with which it overcomes these skeptical doubts. Despite raising the possibility of radical deception, portraying a situation in which people can be wholly taken in by what they think is reality, once Neo takes the red pill and escapes from the Matrix about halfway through the film, all doubts about experience are mysteriously abandoned in the movie. But how can Neo be sure that the supposedly real world he ends up in is itself not illusory? Why aren't any of the rebels, having seen the Matrix in operation and hence aware of its capacity to minutely fabricate an apparent reality, more concerned about the possibility of continuing deception? It is entirely possible that everything in the supposedly real world that Neo and the rebels find themselves in could itself be part of some higher level Matrix, in whose illusory world the first Matrix resides. This is the scenario dramatized, for example, in the 13th Floor, where the creators of a virtual reality simulator modeled on 1930s California discover that their 1990s world is itself a simulation produced in a higher futuristic reality. There is no guarantee, it might be added, that this higher futuristic reality might not in its own turn be an illusion generated in a yet higher world, and so on. The possibility of total illusion makes it hard to be sure that one has ever decisively escaped it, a difficulty that is acknowledged in existence and Total Recall. Thus, the possibility of radical deception cannot be overcome quite as easily as The Matrix supposes. Nonetheless, the film's failure to follow through the very skeptical possibilities it raises does tell us something about the power of the Cartesian problem, the way in which it is enormously difficult to lay to rest the issue of skepticism once the possibility of radical deception has been raised. At this point, it might seem that there would be no way of escaping from the radical kind of doubt that this kind of consideration invokes, no way of ridding ourselves of uncertainty and acquiring certain knowledge. In fact, Descartes thinks that we can overcome this doubt, and we'll see what this involves in a moment. But first of all, there is one further aspect of the cinematic experience that allows us to say something about processes of deception, the questionability of the senses, and indeed brings their susceptibility to illusion home even more forcefully. As I mentioned earlier, we in the audience are aware that the film we see is an illusion. There's no deception there. However, we can still be deceived as to what is going on within that cinematic illusion. Let us examine this more closely. Although characters in a film may suffer from deception or lack of knowledge in various ways, we, the audience, tend to think of ourselves as being in an epistemically superior position. And it is true that, generally speaking, the audience knows more than the fictional agents. This is because, as George Wilson puts it in Narration and Light, the perception of these agents is confined within a line of narrative action which they cannot survey. Those watching, in contrast, usually have events presented to them from a single all-knowing perspective. So, in The Truman Show, for example, we know far earlier than Truman that the world he inhabits is fake. The opening sequence of the film masquerades as the opening sequence of the television show, establishing the reality television framework from the very beginning. To take another example, in Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest, 1959, we know fairly early on that George Kaplan, the man that advertising executive Roger Thornhill, Cary Grant, is searching for in order to clear himself of a murder charge, does not in fact exist, but is the invention of a government agency. However, we do not always enjoy this privileged epistemic position. That is, we may be confined to the perspective of those within the film, knowing only what they know. And the film's director may try to deceive the audience as well, to draw those watching also into the web of deception, until the moment when the truth is revealed to the audience, as well as to the characters. Success here, of course, depends on the director being able to prevent the audience from guessing the secret prematurely. This strategy of deception and surprise revelation is effectively employed in a number of films. In Neil Jordan's The Crying Game, 1992, for example, both we and the central character Fergus discover that the woman Fergus has fallen for is in fact a man. And I think that that's a very transphobic reading of what The Crying Game is, and I want to note that I object to that. Still, this film presents its surprise early on, and we quickly adjust to the new reality of the situation and acknowledge that our previous understanding was illusory. And more extreme forms of audience deception are possible. Entire films have been devoted to systematically misleading their audiences. In A Pure Formality, Onoff, a famous writer, is brought to a lonely, isolated police station without a clear memory of recent events. The film has begun with a gunshot, and Onoff running through the rain until he is stopped and taken into consideration by police. Nearly all the action of the film consists of his relentless interrogation by the police inspector, who is trying to find out what has happened. It seems that we are witnessing a straightforward murder investigation. Only at the very end of the film does it become clear, both to Onoff and the audience, that everything we have seen is quite other than what it appears, that the murder being investigated is actually the writer's own suicide, and that he is in fact in a kind of otherworldly antechamber en route to the afterlife. Other films that try to systematically mislead their audiences in this way include The Sixth Sense by M. Night Shyamalan, 1999, and The Others, 2001, which features similar revelations about the otherworldly status of the main character in the final reel. In all these cases, the revelation is initially disorienting, confounding the beliefs we have built up about what is going on before us. The effect in both cases is to make us suddenly aware of the assumptions we have been making about what we are seeing, suddenly aware of what we have been unthinkingly assuming about the world presented to us, and this gives us a taste of what Descartes seeks to do in raising his skeptical considerations, to challenge our complacency, our confidence about what we think we know. At the same time, these films merely engender false interpretations of the reality the film is presenting us with. We think, for example, that we are watching living people when they are in fact ghosts. Other films come closer to Descartes and the dream or evil demon argument in terms of the degree of deception they engender in their audiences. They try to fool us into thinking that what we are being presented with is reality when in fact it is an illusion. Thus, in The Matrix, what we, like Neo, initially take to be the real world turns out to be a complete computer-generated illusion. We are disoriented as he is when his real situation is suddenly revealed. The revelation, some way into the proceedings, that a good deal of what we have seen is in fact an all-embracing illusion, a dream or fantasy of some sort, also features in films like Jacob's Ladder, Open Your Eyes, and Mulholland Drive. In each case, what we in the audience take to be real, which is to say the apparently real world the film portrays, is revealed to be a fabrication, respectively the final experiences of a dying Tim Robbins, artificial perceptions provided by a cryogenics company to its recently unfrozen but still comatose client, and the last dream of Naomi Watts' failed starlet. Interestingly, these films go so far as to introduce bizarre dreamlike elements into their apparently realistic setting. The effect, however, is to unsettle, to put the audience on edge, rather than to destroy the illusion of reality they present. Even The Matrix signals that all may not be quite what it seems, presenting the apparently realistic scenes within the Matrix with a strange greenish hue. But by finally revealing that what we take to be real in the film is a complete fabrication, these films force us to fundamentally rethink our assumptions about what we are seeing, about the reality of what we experience, and to appreciate the vulnerability of the senses to deception. In this way, the possibility Descartes raises that we might be radically deceived about what we take to be reality, and the fundamental challenge this poses to what we think we know through experience, is brought home to us in a very direct way. Finally, as a variation on this theme of cinematic deception, which does not rely on our sharing and being limited to the perspective of the central character, is The Usual Suspects, which features a series of flashbacks which purport to show us the events leading up to a raid on a ship by a gang of criminals. The only survivor, petty criminal Verbal, Kint, is telling a detective and us how he and his colleagues were forced to raid the ship by master criminal Kaiser Sose, and the flashbacks are supposedly showing us what happened. Only in the last moments does it become clear to the detective that Kint has been lying and that he is probably Kaiser Sose, and that everything we, the audience, have been watching in flashback is in fact a fabrication. Here, we are not mistaking a character's experiences for reality, but being misled by Kint's story about what happened, and by our conventional expectation that flashbacks in films show us the truth about what has gone on. Alfred Hitchcock used the device in Stage Fright, 1950, where the opening scene is a lying flashback, an account of events told by the murderer himself, which programs the audience to believe in his innocence. With Usual Suspects, it has become the basis for an entire film. Now, this film does not portray the kind of radical deception of its characters that we find, for example, in The Matrix. After all, Kint simply tells a false story and fools the detective. Nonetheless, we in the audience have been completely deceived because the story has been allowed to structure the entire film we have been watching and to determine what we are allowed to see. And this serves to highlight another aspect of cinematic deception, the crucial element in making it possible. The audience is able to be deceived about what is going on because the film's director can completely control the kind and range of information that is available to those watching, which opens up the possibility of systematically misleading the audience as to what is going on in the film, bringing them to make false inferences and so on. So here, in fact, we have another cinematic parallel for the evil demon scenario, and indeed perhaps one of the best. The director as the arch deceiver of the watching audience.